Idaho Matters podcast is brought to you by St. Luke's On Demand Virtual Care, which allows patients to see a provider from their home using a computer or smartphone with on demand care for common ailments such as a cough, sore throat, or a sinus issue. More information at stlukesonline.org. More Idaho Matters now from the studios of Boise State Public Radio News. I'm Gemma Gaudette. Mobility, it is not something most of us think about until we lose it. Maybe it's an accident or an injury. Possibly it's just getting older and a little less able to make it up the front steps to your house. So, how do you make it easier to navigate your home for yourself or for a visitor who is using a mobility device like a wheelchair or a walker? Well, making your home more accessible is called Visitability, and it's gaining ground not only in the real estate market, but for millions of baby boomers who want to stay in their homes as they get older. Visitability is a core mission of the Idaho Access Project. This dedicated group of volunteers work together to make not only homes more accessible, but also businesses and even Idaho's recreational spaces. So joining us today to talk more about the project are Jeremy Maxson and Dana Gover, co-founders of the project, along with board member Eric Kingston. I want to welcome all of you to the program. Thanks for taking time today.
Thanks, Jim.
Jeremy, let me begin the conversation with you. You and Dana co-founded the project about 7 years ago. So tell us exactly what the project does and what its mission is.
Sure. We founded the project about 7 years ago with one of our peers, Diana Willis, and we really just noticed that there were a lot of opportunities being missed to make sure that accessibility is at the forefront of design, whether it be new home construction or neighborhoods. We were a little shocked that even in some new modern construction, you can find barriers, unintentional barriers in the construction process that you think would be caught by, federal laws and things like the ADA. But our thinking was that if you have got folks at the table with lived experience, people who are blind, people who use wheelchairs, people who are deaf or hard of hearing, that you're going to get a better outcome, and you're going to get a more inclusive and accessible community all around, which benefits everyone.
So, Dana, why did you want to help create the Idaho Access Project? What was your motivation behind that?
Well, thanks for that question. So, I'm a person with a disability. I use a wheelchair for mobility. I've also been working in this field for several years since, well, right after my accident back in 1980, 79. So, when Jeremy and I and Diana all met, we just started talking and brainstorming about how could we make our communities more accessible. I do a lot of stuff with educating on the Americans with Disabilities Act, but sometimes the laws just don't go far enough. And we wanted to create solutions. We wanted to help eliminate barriers, but we wanted to bring people in together to work together towards a solution. So that's kind of how we got started.
And Eric, you joined the board 5 years ago. How did you get involved?
I was invited. I never go anywhere where I'm not invited. Um, I was on a community access review in Barber Valley with these guys, and I've known Dana and Jeremy for many years. I met Diana on that trip, and just really appreciated what they were doing. That the idea of, being proactive and building relationships with private and public partners to kind of anticipate problems before they become, before they're set in concrete, and just build those relationships so people can reach out to us and we can reach out to them. And I come from a community and economic development background, and it just makes perfect sense to me what they're doing.
Jeremy, I used the term visitability when I was introducing this segment. Can you talk a little bit more about what that is and why it's important to the housing market?
Sure. Visitability is the concept of having homes, not just a single home, but entire neighborhoods that are accessible. So I live in a neighborhood in Boise, Barber Valley, and I live in a very accessible home. I do not live in a very accessible neighborhood when it comes to visiting my neighbors in my subdivision, for example.
Mm.
New home construction, single family home construction would be considered visitable if there were three features. One is a zero step entry somewhere in the home, like the garage, for example. Um, Having doors that are at least 32 inches wide on the main floor, and having one bathroom that you could easily get a wheelchair into and close the door for privacy, for example. These aren't features that are what you would find, in a hospital room when it comes to accessibility, but they are minimal impact features that add value to the home, create the ability for someone to live in that home long term, no matter what kind of life changes they experience, and also create communities where, someone like me who uses a manual wheelchair, I'm not living on an island in my own home, kind of isolated. I can actually
Mhm.
get around in my neighborhood and visit, my neighbors across the street and have a glass of wine or dinner or something like that. That's really the idea. It doesn't add cost, but it definitely adds value.
So, Eric, can you talk a little bit more about that? Because you spend a lot of your time looking at the demographics of disability and then the economic impact of accessibility. And I
Sure.
believe that you've said in the past that a quarter of Idaho adults live with a functional disability. So, as Jeremy explained, visitability, how important is it?
It's really important. It's critical to being, part of a community. You need to be able to access, public gathering spaces, voting, um, that kind of thing. But it's also really important to be able to socialize with neighbors, like Jeremy was saying, and be, kind of in that community. I think one of the things that really strikes me is, according to the CDC's health and disability statistics, I think it's about 11% of people in Idaho live with what's called a functional mobility disability. But when you look at the single family construction, throughout the state, less than 0.5% of the single family homes are usable or visitable by somebody in a wheelchair. So there's a huge gap there, and that makes a big difference. You can't sell somebody a house if they can't get in the door. I mean, that's one of the things we like
Mm.
to stress.
And Dana, we've heard that about 70% of us will experience some form of disability, and our chances really go up as we get older. So, my question for you is this: how important is adaptability to folks who really want to age in place in their own homes? Because we are seeing quite a bit of that now.
Oh, I think that's really, really important. As a baby boomer and as a person in a wheelchair, you don't really think about that until you start getting older if you know somebody with a disability. But I have done, many, many interviews with different people of all ages and abilities. And I have many, many friends. Most people, if you ask them, they want to stay and live in their own home. And it's really difficult if you have the stairs, if you have two floors. So, we talk about visibility. That's just some simple ways for people to be able to live in their own homes.
I also want to talk about inclusive recreation. This is also something that IAP is a big proponent of. So, Jeremy, what is that? And can you tell us a little bit about the Idaho Inclusive Recreation Committee?
Sure, and that's really, Dana has taken the lead on that. But the gist is that, we live in an incredible state with incredible mountains and rivers and deserts and all kinds of things that people love about Idaho and enjoy about Idaho. And we want to make sure that everyone, no matter what your ability, what our ability, have the same opportunities to go out there and enjoy those things that make Idaho great, whether it's getting on a river, getting on a trail, enjoying a cabin or a yurt, everything from winter to summer. Recreation is abound, and it's so important for physical health, mental health, community health. And we have just been working with a bunch of different organizations and agencies that have a hand in recreation, everything from the BLM to the chambers of commerce and kind of the state
Hmm.
recreation promotional organizations, to provide input and perspective and go out and actually test sites to evaluate them and make suggestions for improvement. to make them accessible to everybody. So it is what Idaho is all about, and it's really critical that that resource be available for everyone for the good of the larger community in our state.
So, Dana, I think a lot of folks might think that making recreation inclusive is just too hard or it's too expensive. Can you talk to us about really how difficult it is to make this happen? Because as Jeremy said, this is something that should be accessible for anyone who wants to enjoy it.
Well, like, yeah, exactly what Jeremy said. There's a lot of different types of opportunities for recreation. We're not about paving everything. We're about, like, looking at the natural way that recreation is done. I mean, I've had friends that who are blind that like to go out and do water sports. We've got a lot of friends that like to do hiking, and there's a lot of different alternative ways to hike. You can get some bikes that you can do that with. I know friends that use wheelchairs that horseback ride. I mean, it's just a gamut. You just need to have the opportunity to do that. Ridge to Rivers has been doing a really good job trying to make their trails more accessible for people with disabilities. I think, Eric, you've been on some raft trips that are really great and accessible. I know Coeur d'Alene was a really good example with the launch up there. If you want to just talk a little bit about that.
Sure. We did our North Idaho trip, and in part of that, we rented some tandem kayaks up in Coeur d'Alene at Atlas Park, and they have a really wonderful kind of accessible kayak launch. So it's easy for someone to transfer from a wheelchair, for instance, into a kayak. And in this case, our board member Diana was on that trip, so she and I were in a tandem. And it's just a great way to experience the get out on the water. And she and I did a trip with my wife and some other friends. One of the folks on this trip last week on the Payette is someone who's deaf. And so, when you have a paddle boat, you just have to make some accommodations and figure out, how to sync everybody synced up when you're paddling. It was pretty fun. So there's lots of ways to do it.
I'd like to talk next about Hands Around the Capitol, which is hosted by the Idaho Access Project. Who wants to jump in and tell us how this got started?
I can do that. This is Dana. So we started this in 2010. Back then, what we were, our organization was called, oh gosh, I know that was the ADA Task Force, and we wanted to do some type of celebration that really, that nobody else was doing in the United States. So we came up with the idea to circle the Capitol to honor not just the Americans with Disabilities Act, but also our soldiers. Because I think back then there was quite a bit of war going on with Afghanistan, and there was a lot of people coming back from that area in the Middle East, coming back with severe disabilities. So we started that in 2010, and then we did another one in 2015. And then in 2020, because of COVID, we had to do a virtual event that lasted a year. And that's kind of where our recreation meetings started coming from. And then this year, we're doing a really big Hands Around the Capitol on July 25th from 11 to 4. And we're going to do some different multicultural performances. Also, we're going to have a lot of interactive booths. We're going to be demonstrating some different assistive technology. We'll have a video person there that will be recording people's stories on why the ADA matters and why Medicaid matters. We'll have some kid zones, some food trucks, and everything is free. So we're really getting excited for it. It's getting closer, and we would love people to come and show up and just enjoy the day with us.
And what is the day, Dana?
It's July 25th.
Cecil Andrews Park by the
Oh,
state.
I'm sorry. It's Cecil
Yeah.
Andrews.
Cecil Andrews Park, right downtown on July 25th. We got it. Before we wrap up, Jeremy, let me ask you this question. This year's event does celebrate the 35th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Well, what do people need to understand about the ADA and really the importance of it?
That we have to protect and support these laws and the progress that we've made. Life has not always been as easy And it still isn't easy for a lot of people with disabilities, but things in different ways have gotten a lot better because of the work and the hard work and the struggles that many people in our country and around the world have made to advance these types of laws. And that we can't forget about them, because when we do, those laws weaken and they can potentially go away. So I think we need to stay focused on how important this civil right law is, and how many people it impacts, and that we need to, we need to stay focused on making sure that we don't ever lose the rights that we've gained as people with disabilities to live independently in our community with everyone else.
I want to thank all three of you for joining us today to talk to us about this. We've been speaking with Jeremy Maxland and Dana Gover, co-founders of the Idaho Access Project, along with board member Eric Kingston. I'm Gemma Gaudette, and this is Idaho Matters.
These days, there's so much news, it can be hard to keep up with what it all means for you, your family, and your community. The Consider This podcast from NPR features our award-winning journalism. 6 days a week, we bring you a deep dive on a news story and provide the context and analysis that helps you make sense of the news. We get behind the headlines. We get to the truth. Listen to the Consider This podcast from NPR.